My name is Claire Whitmore. I used to think I had a normal family. A lawyer husband, a teenage daughter, and a small house in Portland that was quiet enough to call fine, until one rainy afternoon I opened the trunk of my husband's old car, planning to sell it to help cover our daughter's tuition, and found an unmarked USB drive, hidden carefully beneath the passenger seat. I don't know what made my hand tremble as I plugged it into the laptop, but when the photos appeared, my husband, the man who had been in the ground for 3 months, was holding another child. A little girl, not my daughter. Have you ever discovered that the person you loved most was living an entirely different life behind your back? Leave a comment if the truth has ever shattered everything you believed, and don't forget to like and subscribe for the rest of the story, because what I found next was far more terrifying. I sat there in Ethan's office, the room I used to call the paper cave because it was always cluttered with books, folders, and thick files from the complicated immigration cases he handled. Today it was strangely silent. No familiar sound of typing, no scent of morning coffee, no blazer hanging loosely on the back of his chair. Just me and the USB plugged into his computer, and the images that were reshaping everything I once believed to be true. I still remember the first time I met Ethan. It was at a workshop for teachers and lawyers who supported underprivileged kids in the school district. I was looking for someone to advocate for a Guatemalan student facing deportation. He was deep in debate with 3 other attorneys about flaws in the sponsorship system. And then, in a moment of foolish boldness, I raised my hand and jumped into the conversation. Ethan turned, looked at me with a mix of surprise and softness. "Do teachers usually interrupt lawyers like this?" he teased. We argued about immigration policy on the very day we met. 3 months later, I said yes to a date. 1 year later, we were married. Ethan was always a man of routine. He woke up early, had breakfast on schedule, called his mother every Saturday night, and went to church with Sadie and me every Sunday. He wasn't the love letter or passionate hug type, but he made sure the water heater worked, my car got regular checkups, and Sadie always had someone to pick her up if I was caught at work. He loved her in quiet ways. Sadie once said, "Dad doesn't hug me as much as Mia's dad, but he always brings the tissues and granola bars I like." That was Ethan. He loved through action, through presence, through responsibility. I used to believe our marriage was the kind of love you didn't need to turn into a movie. Steady, quiet, enduring. But now, I sat there, staring at the photos on that USB pictures of Ethan beaming next to a little girl with messy curls and dimpled cheeks. A smile he no longer gave me, not even Sadie. Not in the past few years, at least. And I started to remember. He used to travel to Seattle once a month, sometimes twice. At first it was for client work, later it was conferences. I remember once he called and said, "I think I'll stay overnight, flight's delayed, give Sadie a hug for me." I didn't question it. I was busy too. Sadie was going through puberty and I was drowning in finals. Ethan always made things sound reasonable. But then I remembered. There was a time he forgot his coat in the car and I offered to bring it to his office. His reaction was quick, almost abrupt. "No need, I'm fine. It's cold, but I borrowed one." That struck me as odd. But I brushed it off. Maybe I was being too sensitive, maybe I was exhausted. And the distance between us began with small things like that. He came home later more often, sometimes slept on the couch, saying he didn't want to wake me. On holidays he'd make excuses about needing to call a detained client, slipping out of the warm family dinners Sadie always looked forward to. I once asked him, "Ethan, are you okay? Is there something I should know?" He smiled, pulled me close, kissed my forehead. "We're both drained. A little space might help." I took that kiss as an answer, and I was wrong. Now, looking at the documents, the regular wire transfers twice a month, I realized Ethan wasn't just on work trips. He was building something else, a different life, a truth he never intended for me to find out. I don't know what stunned me more, the betrayal, or the fact that he truly loved another child with the same heart that once belonged to this family. I don't know if I ever truly knew the man I lived with for 17 years. Google Maps led me to a small street on the southern outskirts of Seattle, A place I'd never been even though Ethan had been working in that city for years. On the way there, the drizzle hung like a thin veil across the windshield. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need any extra noise to drown out the whispers in my head. The address led to an old 2-story apartment building, its pale yellow paint peeling from age. Everything around it felt eerily quiet, with only the wind threading through the bougainvillea vines and the earthy smell of wet grass after rain. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the wheel like letting go might make everything shatter. A little girl was playing on the front porch. Her face came into view through the fogged glass. Curly hair framed her round cheeks, and her brown eyes tilted toward the sky like she was counting clouds. That was Sophie, and what squeezed my heart was her smile. It was exactly like Ethan's. That tilted grin, the left side dimple, even the way her arms folded into her chest when she laughed. It was exactly like Sadie as a toddler. And just like her father. I don't know how long I stood there. Part of me wanted to run, but my legs didn't move. The door opened and a woman stepped out carrying a trash bag, slender frame, long black hair, tied back with a faded silver band. She looked up, and our eyes locked, as if some invisible string had just pulled tight then snapped. She knew. And I was certain. I was only a few steps away from her. Sophie kept playing on the porch, unaware. I'm Ethan's wife. She didn't move. Her eyes held mine, stunned. Then, her lips parted, her eyes wide with panic, her hands dropped, the trash bag hitting the ground, soda cans rolling across the pavement. Oh God, is he dead? Her knees gave out like her spine had vanished. When? 3 months ago, stroke, no warning. I don't even know what tone I used to say those words, maybe like reading a bulletin. Because honestly, I hadn't fully processed that truth myself. I'd been living the last 3 months like a ghost. Because Ethan had taken a part of me with him. Sophie stopped playing and turned to her mother. Mom, what's wrong? Juliana, that's what I later learned her name was, tried to stand, but her eyes never left mine. Go inside, Sophie. Can you grab Mommy a glass of water, sweetheart? She ran in without asking a thing, and there we were, 2 women standing in a hollow silence where the truth had just burst open like a door that could never be closed again. I didn't know he had a family, Juliana said, her voice trembling. I swear, I really didn't. She wore no makeup, faded jeans and an old sweater. Not the kind of woman people get jealous over, but her eyes held something I didn't expect. Real pain, not fake. I'm not here to cause drama, I said. I need to understand what happened. Juliana looked down at her hands like they no longer belonged to her. Can we talk inside? Sophie won't hear. I think we need to talk. Juliana's apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms. The old wood floors creaked with every step. Nothing was excessive. A worn gray sofa, a bookshelf with a few Spanish novels, and a fridge covered in drawings clearly done by a child. I perched on the edge of the couch, tension pulling at my spine. Juliana made tea from some leaves I didn't recognize. It smelled faintly sweet but unfamiliar, not like home. Nothing here was like me. But I knew Ethan had once belonged to this place. She set the cup in front of me, then sat in the chair across, her hands folded together, fingernails pressing into skin. I don't know where to start. Wherever feels most honest, I replied, eyes fixed on the condensation trailing down the glass. Juliana took a deep breath, then slowly began. I met him at a community legal clinic. I was 6 months pregnant. Sophie's father left when he found out my immigration status was gone. I had no job, no home, and I couldn't go back to Venezuela. Ethan was the volunteer lawyer that day. He found me a place to stay in a friend's vacant apartment. She paused, as if checking whether she was still telling the truth. He said he lost his wife to cancer, that he understood loss, that he couldn't save the woman he loved, but if there was something he could do to help me and my baby, that was his way of making peace with the past. I felt cold all over, like someone had shut off the heat inside my body. Juliana looked me in the eye, her voice beginning to shake. I believed him. I believed every word. He never hid his sadness. One time I saw him stare at a photo in his wallet for a long time. a woman with brown hair, smiling gently. That was you, wasn't it? I nodded slightly, my throat clenched tight. He didn't come every day, but he was always there when he said he would be. Sophie's birthdays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, he was always there. Not with flashy gifts, but present. Once he tried to make flan for Sophie and nearly burned the oven. They laughed the whole night. I closed my eyes briefly. I'd never seen Ethan bake. At home, he always claimed he couldn't cook. The kitchen was my and Sadie's territory. Juliana continued, as if each sentence was cleansing a burden she'd carried too long. He sent money regularly, twice a month. Enough to raise Sophie, pay for school, buy her asthma meds. I never doubted him, because who would think someone like that could be lying? I spoke softly, unsure. You never asked about where he lived, his official job? She shook her head. I did. But he said he didn't like talking about the past. That he'd had a sad life, and Seattle was where he chose to start over. I didn't want to push the man who saved me and my daughter. And he was always sincere. She pressed her lips together. Her brown eyes looked at me as if hoping for forgiveness, but afraid it wouldn't come. I didn't know he had another family, I swear. If I had known, I would have never let this happen. I clenched my hands in my lap. Part of me wanted to scream. Do you know how many years I spent in a marriage where that man was peeling off pieces of his heart to send somewhere else? I gritted through my teeth. He had another daughter, Sadie. She's 15, and she thought she was her father's entire world. Juliana raised her hand to cover her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. God, I didn't know. I looked around the apartment again. A photo of Sophie in a princess dress, standing in a park with Ethan lifting her up in both arms, his face smiling, relaxed, unguarded. No sign that he was living a double life. He once told me that sometimes kindness is the only way to salvage the humanity left in yourself, Juliana whispered. I think he loved my daughter. But now I don't know if love is enough to make up for what he did. I turned to look at her, then at the cup of tea now cold. I didn't know how much Ethan had loved me, how much he'd loved her, or if he'd ever truly been honest with either of us. But I knew one thing. He had split his heart in two and left confusion on both ends. I drew a long breath, trying to steady my voice. I came here for the truth, not to hurt anyone further. But Sophie, she's a part of Ethan's life. And I don't know what to do with that. The two of us, two women from what felt like entirely different worlds, sat there in silence. Because no matter the paths that led us here, we were both standing on the same ground, the ground of those left behind by a lie too perfect. I stayed in the car long after leaving Juliana's apartment, hands resting on the wheel, engine silent. Cold air slipped through the cracked window, but I didn't bother rolling it up. Maybe I thought I deserved the sting of the wind, as if it might wake me from this relentless haze. I saw Sophie's face in my mind, her smile, the way she ran to her mother, so trusting and unguarded. Then I saw Sadie, my daughter, who used to run to me the same way, with the same total trust. When I got home, Sadie was sitting at the kitchen table, head bent over her phone, hair draped so low it nearly covered her whole face. The overhead light fell on the old gray hoodie she always wore when she was in a bad mood. I paused, unmoving, then spoke barely louder than the hum of the heater. Sweetheart, I need to talk to you. Sadie didn't look up. If it's about the test, I already know the grade. You don't need to lecture me. No, it's not about school. This time she looked up, and in that one glance I stepped half a pace back. Because in her hazel eyes, the same ones I'd watched since she was a baby, there was only guardedness and exhaustion now, like she sensed something else was about to be taken from her. So what is it? Sadie asked, putting the phone down and crossing her arms. The way she looked at me was exactly like Ethan when he was cornered. I lowered myself into the chair opposite hers, heart pounding. All the words I had rehearsed vanished. I didn't know how to start in a way that wouldn't hurt. But I said it plainly. There's something you need to know. Dad, he had another child, a little girl, around 8 years old. Her name is Sophie. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking like a weight dropping over and over. Sadie blinked. Once. Twice. Then gave a short, dry laugh. And you're kidding, right? I shook my head, trying not to cry. I'm not. I only found out recently. Dad kept it hidden for a long time. And you're telling me like you're reading the news? I didn't know how else to say it. Sadie shoved her chair back and stood abruptly. You've met her, haven't you? You met that woman and that girl? I clenched my hands in my lap. I need to know the truth. And I think you do too. Sadie trembled but stood firm. Her voice shot out like a blade. So what am I? Plan B? The temporary family while he played hero with someone else? No. You're his daughter. He loved you. Ah. So love can be split up like a travel calendar. Seattle today, Portland tomorrow. Next day, send a birthday gift. Day after that, show up for graduation. I burst into tears before I could stop myself. I was lied to too, Sadie. I was also just a piece of a picture your father never meant to finish. Yeah, but you still gotta choose. What about me? Sadie walked over to the shelf and grabbed the framed photo of the three of us at Rockaway Beach 2 years ago. Ethan holding Sadie on his shoulders. Me standing beside them, one arm resting gently around his back. She stared at the photo for a moment, then hurled it to the floor. The glass shattered into tiny shards, reflecting memories that would never be whole again. I don't want to see him anymore. Not in pictures, not in my memories, not anywhere. Sadie. But she had already turned and walked up the stairs, each step pounding hard against the wood. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. Sadie appeared with a backpack slung over her shoulder, hoodie pulled over her head, carrying nothing but her phone and a small wallet. Where are you going? Brooks. And don't call me. You can't leave like this. You're only 15. But I'm not a kid who still believes the dad who taught me to tie my shoes is some kind of hero. I don't know who he was, and I need to get out of here before I lose my mind. I couldn't say a word. Rooted in place, I felt emptied, like a tree carved out by time. The door slammed shut behind her, and I knew I had lost Ethan for the second time. But this time, I had lost Sadie too. That night, I didn't sleep. The photo lay broken before me. I gripped a shard of it in my hand, not even flinching, as if the sting made sense. I thought about how Ethan used to rub Sadie's back when kids teased her at school, how he'd lift her chin and say, "You're my whole world." And now, that world was crumbling piece by piece in my hands. In the family portrait I once thought was complete, it turns out we were only half. And now, even that half was turning its back on me. I don't know what made me open the bank folder that day. It might have been the ticking of the kitchen clock, echoing through the quiet night. Or the old oak filing cabinet in Ethan's office, always left slightly ajar, like it was waiting to be closed by someone who never would. Or maybe it was just this. Sadie still gone after 3 days, and me brewing coffee for one, not knowing what else to do with the silence. I found an envelope labeled Wells Fargo Personal Box, wedged between old tax returns and a copy of our house deed. Inside was a small silver key and a handwritten note. Private safe, September 22nd, 7. Our wedding date. I collapsed to the floor of the office, heart pounding. I knew Ethan had a private safe at the bank, but he never talked about it. I'd never asked. Between spouses, some things are considered small until you realize you know nothing about the person beside you. The next morning, I drove to the downtown Portland branch. The receptionist checked my ID, then bowed slightly. "We have you listed as a co-owner. Please follow me." The manager led me down to the basement, where white painted concrete walls and soft yellow lights drained the color from everything. I slid the key into box number 312, my palm trembling. The lock clicked open easily. No code, no fingerprint scan, just a small, unassuming box, and maybe the truest part of a man I thought I knew. Inside was a sealed envelope, a bundle of documents tied with an indigo ribbon, and a thin leather notebook. On the envelope was Ethan's handwriting. The same tilted letters, slightly crooked on the letter R. A quirk he'd had since college. I ran my fingers over the strokes as if I could touch him through dried ink. Claire. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to explain it aloud. But I hope you'll read to the end, no matter how much it hurts. I opened the letter. The first lines trembled like they'd been written at midnight, when courage is its most fragile form. I'm sorry. I was going to tell you everything. On Sadie's 15th birthday. I wrote the letter, even booked your favorite restaurant. But I couldn't. I couldn't meet her eyes without shame, and when I turned to you, I saw everything I was about to break. I couldn't bear the thought of destroying what we'd built. I met Juliana during an immigration consultation. At the time, I thought I was saving someone, but I let my emotions cross a line. It wasn't a long relationship. Just one night. A night that should never have happened. Then she got pregnant and everything changed. I couldn't bring Juliana into the life you and Sadie had. I lied, thinking if I balanced both sides, maybe I could keep both worlds intact. I was a fool, Claire, and a coward. I loved Sadie. I loved her with everything a father can give, but I couldn't turn my back on Sophie either. I never intended to choose between them. That was my greatest mistake. Thinking I wouldn't have to. I started working with a lawyer to set up a joint scholarship fund for Sadie and Sophie. Their names would appear side by side. Even if they never met, I hoped someday they wouldn't be strangers. I paused, my hand trembling. The tears didn't fall in waves. They slid down quietly, warm and heavy, like each word of Ethan's was seeping into my chest. Later in the letter, Ethan described nights he lay beside me, afraid to sleep, scared of seeing Sadie's eyes if she ever knew the truth. He mentioned entrusting a colleague with an unsigned copy of his will because he was not ready for Claire to know. I opened the bundle of documents. Inside was a draft of his will. The assets were divided 3 ways. 1 part for Sadie, 1 for Sophie, and the rest for the Bridges Fund. An initiative he'd been co-founding to support undocumented students. Last was a financial power of attorney naming me the sole beneficiary in case of his sudden death, before signing the rest of the paperwork. Ethan didn't live long enough to fix what he'd done, but he had started. And what broke me most was learning all of it when he no longer had a chance to say it with his eyes, his hands, his voice. The place I used to run to after every storm. I remained there, lost in stillness, as if time had forgotten me. I don't know how many minutes or how many clock ticks passed. I knew that when I stepped out of that bank basement, the midday rain was falling like a soft mist. Not harsh, but steady, like the pieces Ethan left behind, not whole, not forgiven, but still here. And dripping onto my heart, drop by drop. Word about Sophie spread faster than I expected. I don't know from whom, a bank employee who knew the family, maybe, or someone at the law office where Ethan used to work. But only 1 week after I opened a safety deposit box, my in-laws called. Mrs. Whitmore's voice was so cold it seemed to freeze the air on my end of the line. Claire, we need to see you, in person. I understood immediately. It wasn't about concern for the pain I was going through, or checking whether Sadie was okay. No, she was calling about assets. About reputation. About what they thought they could still control, even though Ethan was gone. The meeting was scheduled at the estate lawyer's office. A room paneled in walnut, soft chandelier light reflecting off the long conference table. I arrived early. I brought Ethan's original letter, a copy of the power of attorney, and the unsigned will. Each sheet felt heavier in my hands, as if every page was evidence against the perfection the Whitmores clung to. They arrived 10 minutes after me. Mrs. Whitmore with gray hair curled meticulously, a plum cashmere coat, chin tilted the way she used to at fundraising galas. Mr. Whitmore was silent, a little more hunched than before, but his eyes still sharp. Behind them walked Thomas, Ethan's brother, the one who always wore charm like a shell over calculated coldness. She was the first to speak, without a greeting. "We can't believe this, Claire. You kept this from us, and now you plan to share the family estate with a child born out of wedlock?" I clenched my hands tightly and looked up. I didn't keep anything. I only found out after Ethan passed. And that is not a child. Sophie is Ethan's daughter, just like Sadie. Thomas let out a sharp breath and leaned toward the estate attorney. We want to request a halt to the asset distribution. Under Oregon law, without a valid will, the estate belongs to the legal wife and legitimate heir. That is, Sadie. The name? Sophie clearly has no legal claim. I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it gently on the table. I have a draft of Ethan's will in progress, along with a handwritten letter he left behind, and a power of attorney granting me authority if he died before the legal process was completed. Mrs. Whitmore gave a dry laugh. Anyone can write a letter. Without Ethan's signature witnessed, it means nothing. I didn't respond. I waited. The estate attorney spoke, calm and measured. We'll need to evaluate the admissibility of these materials, but before proceeding, I'd like to bring in an independent witness. Someone who worked directly with Ethan on these documents. The conference room door opened. A tall, lean man entered, with salt and pepper hair and thin round glasses. I recognized him instantly. Daniel McHale. Ethan's close friend from law school and a former collaborator on complex immigration cases. Daniel took a seat, slowly opened his briefcase and pulled out a small USB drive and a sealed folder. Ethan gave me a full draft of his will and instructions for emergency handling if anything happened before finalization. He had a mild heart attack 2 months ago, and after that he came to my office and recorded a provisional testament, an audio reading of his full will, to document his intent in case he couldn't sign officially. The room fell silent. Daniel nodded to the legal assistant, who opened a laptop and inserted the USB. One click, and Ethan's voice filled the room. I, Ethan Michael Whitmore of sound mind, affirm the following. I wish my estate to be divided equally between my 2 daughters, Sadie Whitmore and Sophie Delgado, under the stewardship of Claire Whitmore, my legal wife. I saw Mrs. Whitmore raise her hand to her mouth, her posture stiff. Mr. Whitmore closed his eyes, brow furrowed. Thomas didn't smirk anymore. Ethan's voice continued, clear and steady. He mentioned the Bridges Scholarship Fund, apologized for not completing the paperwork in time, and ended with a sentence that pierced my chest. I know I've hurt the ones I love most through my silence, but I hope what I leave behind will help them move forward even without me. The recording stopped. The room felt as if we'd all just heard someone leave a place where no light remained. Daniel spoke slowly. Under state law, this recording may not replace a formal will, but taken with the letter, the power of attorney, and indirect witness testimony, it's compelling evidence of Ethan's intent. The attorney nodded, his voice measured. The court may accept this as a supported oral testament, especially in the absence of any contesting documents. Mrs. Whitmore turned to me, her face pale. Claire, are you really going to give everything to that child? To her mother? I looked at her. Calm, not trembling, just tired. I'm going to follow what Ethan left behind. He may not have signed it, but he admitted the truth, and I won't deny the truth just to preserve anyone's false sense of comfort. No one said another word, and for the first time in weeks I felt Ethan speaking for me, with the very voice I had missed so painfully every night, with a truth that, though late, still had a chance to do what was right. I didn't return to the lawyer's office after that meeting. I didn't come back to argue or to haggle over legal clauses or percentages of ownership. I spent the night alone, papers spread across the dining table. Contracts, asset declarations, numbers. But all I looked at was one photo. Ethan carrying Sadie on his shoulders when she turned 6, laughing under the sun in Forest Park. I used to think that if I held on tightly enough, I could protect her from the cracks. But no one can protect anyone from a truth that had been growing in the dark for years. I no longer wanted to hold on to anything, except the last kindness I had left to give. I signed the withdrawal from any legal claim regarding Sophie and Juliana and authorized the estate according to Ethan's unfinished wishes. Sadie received her designated portion, and the share Ethan had intended for Sophie, I transferred fully to her name, no conditions, no thank you note required. The final document I signed before leaving the office was the founding charter for the Bridges Fund, Ethan M. Whitmore Memorial Fund, a small scholarship program to support immigrant students in situations like Juliana's long ago. Not to atone for Ethan, but to ensure the good he quietly didn't die with him. Sadie came home on an October afternoon. No doorbell, no warning text. I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing red apples I'd just bought, when I heard the front door click open. Sadie walked in, old hoodie still pulled up, backpack dragging across the tiled floor. I didn't say anything. I looked at her like I wasn't sure I'd ever see her return. She set her bag down, pulled out her rain-soaked jacket, then stood straight, eyes locked on mine. I read everything, I figured. She stood still for a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat at the table. Her voice was hoarse, but no longer sharp like in the days of fury. Dad was wrong, but I don't want anyone else paying for his weakness. I clenched my hands, voice catching. You don't have to forgive. I'm not asking you to love Sophie or accept anything right away. Sadie shook her head, eyes misty but resolute. I don't hate her. I just hate the feeling of having to relearn someone I thought I already knew. Dad's not here for me to ask, but Sophie is. And you are. I stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. It was a light touch, but to me it was a pulse returning. I transferred the assets to Sophie. There's no more dispute, everything's been settled. Sadie raised an eyebrow, unsurprised. I knew you would. You've never been one to hold something back if it could save someone. I smiled, not from relief, but because she still saw who I was, even when I'd forgotten myself. Sadie lifted her glass, took a sip, then said softly, You created the fund for Dad? Not to honor him, but to continue the good he once tried to do, in a more honest way. Then, okay. I didn't know what else to say. In that moment, I realized my daughter, Evie, only 15, had touched a kind of maturity I had spent half my life avoiding. That letting go isn't failure. Sometimes, it's the only way to stop repeating the same harm. And for the first time in many months, that kitchen, once a trench of silence and anger, held the scent of sweet apples, the warmth of breath, and two women learning how to truly listen to each other. I spent all Saturday morning preparing dinner, not because it was fancy or to impress anyone. I kept it simple. Honey roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, and a bit of cheesy bread Sadie had loved since she was little. But with each chop of onion, each oven check, my hands trembled slightly. I don't know how tonight will go. Juliana agreed to come. After a long pause on the phone, she said she'd walk from home. It's only 30 minutes away. Sophie will come too. If Claire thinks she's ready, Juliana said. As for me, I don't know which of us needs more preparation. Sadie came down the stairs just as I was sprinkling pepper over the golden chicken skin. She wore a plain t-shirt, jeans, her hair tied back. No makeup, no expression. Are they almost here? She asked, like she was asking about a pizza delivery. Probably 10 minutes, I said, wiping my hands on the kitchen towel. You okay? Sadie shrugged. As okay as a teenager meeting her half-sister with no clue what to call her. I tried to smile, but my eyes blurred with tears. Call her Sophie. All the other names we can leave for later. The knock came exactly at 6 p.m. My heart raced. I glanced at Sadie. She stood just behind me, one hand loosely gripping her shirt hem. I opened the door. Juliana stood there in an olive green coat, hair in a low bun, hand gently resting on Sophie's shoulder. The little girl wore a brown knit dress, clutching a copy of Charlotte's Web, its cover slightly worn. Her eyes glanced up at me, cautious, then shifted to Sadie. Come in, both of you, I said, stepping aside. No one spoke for the first 10 seconds. Then Sadie broke the silence, soft but clear. You like that book? Yes. I liked the part where Wilbur builds the web. Wilbur's the pig, Sadie smirked. Charlotte's the spider. Sophie nodded more eagerly, her eyes lighting up. Right, but I think the pig's the one who learns the biggest lesson. Sadie tilted her head. I knew that look. She was thinking, weighing things, and letting herself open a little. Yeah, you're right, the pig learned the most. I stayed behind the kitchen counter, not joining in. Just listening, memorizing every word like someone relearning how to hope. Dinner was slow, quiet but not tense. Juliana and I sat at opposite ends of the table, leaving the middle space for the girls. Sophie kept her book on her lap under the table, while Sadie tore pieces of bread but didn't leave a single crumb behind. Did Dad ever make this dish for you? Sadie asked, voice steady. Sophie shook her head. No, but he used to make heart-shaped omelets. Last time he made pancakes for me was when I was 12. After that, it was all takeout. He made really good gingerbread cookies, Sophie said with a soft laugh, but only one shape, dolphins. I asked why not snowmen, and he said, dolphins are smarter. Sadie laughed, quietly, but it was a real laugh. I looked at Juliana. She was smiling too, eyes a little glassy. No one had to say it, but I knew in that moment those two girls had found a shared memory. A thread not made of blood, but of something small and real, something only one man, named Ethan, had ever given to both of them. After dinner, Sadie offered to wash the dishes. I stepped out back to grab more firewood. When I came back in, I saw Sophie standing near the bookshelf, fingers brushing along the spines of Ethan's books, while Sadie leaned against the doorway nearby. Did Dad ever tell you the tree story? What tree? The one in Powell Park. He said once he climbed it when he first moved here and got stuck for nearly an hour. Waited for the firefighters, terrified of heights but still trying to act cool for a girl. Sadie laughed. He told me he slipped while trying to rescue a bird. Sophie nodded seriously. He told me he saved both, the bird and his pride. I turned back to the kitchen, not wanting to break that fragile moment. My hands trembled, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the quiet knowledge that what I thought impossible was now unfolding right before me. Two halves of a man, sitting in the same room, breathing the same air, beginning to accept each other's existence. No pressure, no resentment, just the first steps. Slow, fragile, but real. One fall morning, when the breeze through the window gently stirred the old lace curtains in Ethan's office, I sat down at his desk, pulled out a sheet of thick cream paper and the fountain pen he once used to sign Christmas cards. I didn't write right away. I let my hand rest on the paper for a few minutes, as if listening to my own breath in the silence that had been filled in ways none of us ever expected. I wrote to Sophie. Dear Sophie, I don't know if you're old enough to understand everything grown-ups do, but I believe you're grown enough to understand something important. You are not a mistake. You are proof of the complicated heart of a man both your mother and I once loved, in very different ways. Your father, Ethan, did not do everything right. But I truly believe that in the love he had for you there was no lie. Maybe one day you'll wonder why adults choose silence over honesty. Why they didn't tell the truth from the start. I don't have a better answer than to admit we were afraid. Afraid of losing what we cherished, so we kept quiet instead of facing it. But Sophie, what matters isn't where someone went wrong, but that you are here, and you deserve everything good. I'm not writing this to ask you for anything, not to explain on anyone's behalf. I simply want you to know. If someday you ever feel unsure where you belong, know this. In a little house in South Portland, there's someone who will always be ready to call you family. Warmly, Claire. I placed the letter in a white envelope, unsealed, and gently left it on Sadie's desk. No note. I didn't need to say anything. She would understand when she was ready. A few weeks later, I heard the soft vibration of her phone on the kitchen table as she folded up her engineering sketch. She opened the message and smiled slightly. I didn't ask, but a few minutes later she said, I asked Sophie for help with my physics assignment. She's better at vectors than I thought. I only nodded, my hands still scrubbing dishes. But my heart swelled with warmth, like sunlight breaking through a dense autumn canopy. The short texts turned into calls. The short calls turned into voice chats between two girls life had once put on opposite sides. Winter came, and I saw Sadie write, Sophie, on a Christmas card pinned to the fridge. One Saturday afternoon, I came back from the farmer's market carrying greens and warm bread, and heard laughter in the kitchen. Sophie was sitting on a stool, legs swinging, telling a story about a science experiment. Sadie was across from her, laughing hard, hair clip falling out without a care. The two girls didn't need pushing to become close, they just needed permission to begin again, in their own way. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching without saying a word, not because I wanted to interrupt, but because I knew Some moments are meant to be written by them alone. Ethan was gone, but in a house that once held only silence and sighs, there was laughter now, light as morning steam. Not loud, not wild, but enough to know this place was alive. I don't know if anyone would still call us a family by traditional definition, but maybe it's that imperfection that makes it more real. No one here is trying to replace anyone. No one is forced to forgive completely. We didn't choose how the pieces fell apart, but we chose how to put them back into something with shape, with meaning, and worth holding on to. One evening, as we cleared the dinner table, Sadie looked up and asked, "Mom, what if one day I want Sophie to come with us on the summer trip? Would that be okay?" I walked over, took the plate from her hands, and said quietly, "I think that's what your father always hoped for. He didn't have the courage to begin, but you do." Sadie smiled, and for the first time in a long while, her eyes weren't looking back. They were facing forward, toward a place where family isn't about bloodlines or signatures, but about choosing, each day, to love someone, even if it all started with a mistake. And maybe the most moving part for me isn't that the hurt was fully healed, but that those who were once hurt chose not to pass it on. Sadie hasn't forgiven completely. I haven't forgotten the nights of confusion. But through all the hesitant breaths, all the glances that didn't last too long, we still chose to move forward. Not because the past stopped hurting, but because something new was stirring. And it was worth protecting. What about you? If one day you found out the person you trusted most had another life, another truth never shared, what would you do? Would you face it? Would you have the courage to forgive, or simply walk forward in silence? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know, in that situation, what you'd choose: anger, denial, or another path. Don't forget to follow the channel for more stories about family, about choices, and about the broken pieces of life that can still be mended if we choose to believe.